The mighty dollar, the last known reserve currency of the world, is coming to an end. For the past 100 years, dollar has ruled the worldwide trade. Today, more than 60% of worldwide trade is invoiced in US dollars. In 1944, the US dollar became the world's official reserve currency, replacing the UK's pound sterling. This move gave America an immense amount of power to strong-arm every other country in the world. US can print any amount of US dollars, and as a result, poor nations have to take the beating in the form of inflation. Dollar allows the US to destroy any country just through sanctions without even going to war. Venezuela, Iran, and North Korea. These countries have taken a beating by US without having to launch an expensive invasion. US has been enjoying this special status around the world for too long now, and that's just because of the US dollar. The world's reserve currencies have evolved over time. For example, in the 19th century, the French franc was the world's reserve currency. However, as the French economy deteriorated, their currency lost its unique status. The British pound sterling followed. It held the title of reserve currency for more than a century until the British economy was weakened by the World War II and the pound lost its special status. After the decline of the British pound, US dollar became the world's official reserve currency. If we look at the history, each reserve currency has lasted around 100 years on average, which means that the clock is ticking for the US dollar since its time is almost over. Today, the US dollar represents 60% value of all the currencies around the world. Countries have been taking a hit on their economies because of US dollar, which is why a plan to ditch the US dollar is underway. Here is how. Economic tensions between the United States and China have been high. China wanted to end the dominance of the US dollar, so in 2013, it formed BRICS, a group of developing countries comprised of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. BRICS' ultimate goal was to reduce reliance on the US dollar. China launched an anti-dollar movement through BRICS. This anti-dollar movement appears to be working, as Brazil, along with China, has taken a very bold step. Brazil is China's most important trading partner. The annual trade between the two countries amounts to 150 billion US dollars. And just last week, Brazil and China officially decided to ditch the US dollar and trade in their own currencies. This means that the United States would no longer be able to control how the two countries trade with each other. It's the first time in 80 years that any two economies of this size have abandoned the US dollar entirely. Brazil understands that by abandoning US dollars, they will face America's wrath, but they're not afraid of it, perhaps because they understand that America's economy is already collapsing and that a handshake with China might benefit them in the long run. China and Brazil are not the only countries that have embraced the de-dollarization movement. Russia, the US's arch-rival since the Cold War, appears to be the most vocal supporter of China's de-dollarization movement. Since the Ukraine-Russia war, US has imposed Russia with a bunch of sanctions. But Russia came up with a plan, and the plan was to ditch the US dollar and adopt the Chinese yuan. In fact, China's yuan has replaced the US dollar as the most traded currency in Russia. People in Russia have started opening savings accounts in Chinese yuan to keep themselves safe from currency devaluation. In 2022 alone, Russia's exports amounted to 594 billion US dollars, which means that if Russia completely abandons the US dollar like China and Brazil, then it would be a blow for the US dollar. Another reason which endangers the domination of US dollar is the Middle East's new aggressive policy against the United States. Saudi Arabia is a major reason behind the solid foundation of US dollar. Back in 1945, United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia, and the deal was that the US would provide military support to Saudi Arabia if they agreed to only sell their oil in US dollars. This agreement helped cement the US dollar's status as the world's reserve currency, but Saudi Arabia's interests are now tilting towards China, since China is the biggest importer of Saudi oil. According to the report, Saudi Arabia is considering accepting yuan instead of dollar for its oil sales to China. And if that happens, it would trigger a domino effect, where a lot of other countries around the world would want to buy the oil in their own currencies too. If Saudi Arabia break the petrodollar agreement, which is very likely to happen, then that would be the end of US dollar as a reserve currency. Another major economy that has joined the anti-dollar movement is India. Despite the fact that India and China have historically been rivals, with both countries fighting over territorial differences, India is now following China's lead against the US dollar. India recently announced that all international trade will be conducted in rupees rather than US dollars. India, China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, all of which have been at odds in the past, have now banded together against the US dollar. US Federal Reserve says that it's impossible to topple the US dollar. They say it's too hard, but they forget that people used to say the same thing about the pound even when the UK was on the brink of losing the World War. They also thought the same about Rome even when it was on the brink of its collapse, and they even said the same about the Soviet Union too. However, amongst all of them, every single empire fell, but nobody believed it until it actually happened.